Welcome back. Matchup set. The brand new 2024 general election between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump is now underway, with both camps beginning to fight in these last 14 weeks of the campaign. We'll talk about how the polling looks, what each candidate's path to 270 looks like, and where each campaign is making inroads. Plus, I'll sit down with gun violence prevention advocate Sheri Williams to talk about her work in this space and how she's working to help end the gun violence epidemic in this country. We'll be talking about those stories and more. Today, July 25th, 2024. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show. With me, your host, Ishan. Thank you so much for joining us back here on the Ishan S. Show. We have a great episode planned, and I'm so excited to share my conversation with Sheri Williams later in the episode. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the general election and how it's changed and where we're headed right now. So with Vice President Kamala Harris very easily consolidating the Democratic Party base of support, the general election matchup is all but certainly finalized. I mean, of course, nothing is official until it's official, but for the most part, we can say it's finalized between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, which is a change from just a week ago. Now, in terms of where the polling is at, we don't have a lot of data at this time since the dynamics of this race did just change within the last 5 days. But from the early polling we're seeing, here's how things look right now. According to a Reuters and Ipsos poll, Vice President Kamala Harris has opened up a nice 2-point margin over former President Donald Trump, leading him 44% to 42%. Now, mind you, it's within that margin of error, which means that it is a statistical tie, but it isn't too shabby because just last Sunday, when President Biden was still in the race and we were polling him against former President Donald Trump, that same poll read that he was trailing Trump by 2 points. So not bad at all. And then another example of this race being in a dead heat right now, a CNN poll that we just got in the last few days shows that Harris is trailing Trump by a 3-point margin, with her getting 46% to Trump's 49%. Now, this is closer than when Joe Biden and Trump were polled against each other in the same CNN poll. And what they did is they took the same voters that they polled and then polled them again. But beyond the raw polling, in the head-to-head matchups, we should also know how voters feel about the candidates on their own. And I think this is the more interesting data, because the head-to-head polls, we don't vote nationally, but the way people feel sets the mood for how things go. And in that poll, it said 50% of Kamala Harris voters were going to vote for her because they wanted to support her, an affirmative vote for Kamala Harris, as opposed to just voting against Donald Trump, which is a shift from Biden's record, where he was just getting 37% of his supporters for his policies, while 2/3 of his voters were voting for him solely for the reason of voting against former President Trump. So Kamala Harris is already showing that her momentum means something because she is organically winning that support. And of course, Republicans are calling it a honeymoon period, but if you look at the huge shift in data, it shows that it's comfortable. But Donald Trump does still outdo both of them, with 74% of his supporters saying that they're voting for the man himself, which actually does represent an improvement of 8% since the assassination attempt on his life. But admittedly, again, going back to Kamala Harris, it shows this huge shift in energy that is going towards her, and it's momentum that's following her. But among specific voter groups that we're seeing, Harris is generally on par with President Biden, although support has marginally shifted in favor of the former president, but by a percentage point at most. Now, where things have a drastic change is with young voters who really seem to like the vice president. She has managed to grow support from Biden's 42% to 47%. Among Black voters, she expands the share from 70% to 78%, and with female voters, she's growing support from 45% to 50%. It should be noted that Harris is eating away from Trump's support in all these categories, so it's not like undecided's going for her. She's eating away from Trump's support. But when looking at the raw numbers, Harris is generally energizing the Democratic base and that Democratic coalition, which is so excited to vote for her. I really do think this is going to be a base election. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that I was expecting this race to be one of those very low turnout elections. So whoever can fire up their base more, whoever can bring them out to vote is going to win. Now, I think the introduction of Vice President Harris into the equation may change this from being a low turnout election, but even if it's not, even if it doesn't change that, she does excite more of the Democratic base than we even saw in 2020. And I've been talking and listening to Democrats, and they're all saying that they're excited to vote for the vice president for the first time in a long time, since Barack Obama in 2008. Maybe we're not matching those levels of excitement and energy, but definitely more excited I see voters than they were in 2016 or 2020. People don't feel as pessimistic. There's a forward-looking message. But of course, we know that the Electoral College is what matters in this election, and Harris needs to win individual states to secure the presidency. The demographic data we get don't really help us identify that. But let's take a closer look at the states. Now, before I do, for my friends who don't understand how presidential elections work in America, it's pretty simple. Each state is allotted a certain number of electoral votes depending on how many people they send to Congress. And with these states, we have what we like to call safe states, lean states, and then toss-ups. Safe states, as implied in the name, are safe for whatever party is usually winning them, like how California is a safe state for Democrats. Lean states are states which aren't super likely to be in the party's column, but more likely than not, it's going to go to them. Think of your Floridas for Republicans. Safe states and lean states usually make up most of the electoral vote count, but usually don't deliver enough for either candidate. To receive the requisite 270 votes to become electoral votes to become president, it's in the toss-ups. It's in these toss-up elections where the real power shows. And those represent a shift in the balance of power. A survey released by Emerson College Polling and The Hill found that Trump was leading Harris by 5 points in swing state Arizona, 49% to 44%. He was leading her by 2 points in Georgia, 48 to 46, by 1 point in Michigan, 46 to 45, by 2 points in Pennsylvania, 48 to 46, and was tied with her in Wisconsin, with both polling at 47%. Now, let's note that while Trump leads within a lot of these states, his lead does come in within that margin of error. That basically means that statistically they're tied, give or take is usually what margin of error means, except for Arizona, which is more comfortably in Trump's column. But when we talk about this general election, I think that's where a running mate can make a huge difference. While J.D. Vance's selection, whatever you feel about him, it was demonstrated, first and foremost, as a way to appeal to Midwestern working class Appalachian voters. Whether or not he's actually going to be doing that, we're learning now, is debatable. However, this represents a really nice opportunity for Vice President Harris. If she can pick a running mate from one of these states, like Mark Kelly in Arizona or Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who have the skills of winning over these types of swing independent voters that Harris may not be able to do on her own necessarily, then it represents for Democrats a sweet chance to tap into this voter base. Because Democrats run on a coalition, Republicans run on a base. If Democrats can expand that coalition, then they can really win this general election in a nice way. And if you look at my video from yesterday about the potential running mates, you'll see that Democrats might feel a little more comfortable about their chances if the candidates that are being talked about right now, one of them gets picked, because the goal is to try to win those swing voters, since Harris is already taking care of energizing the base. Now, as this campaign goes on, it will undeniably become more nasty and divisive. Former President Donald Trump, who said he would try to be a unity candidate, threw that promise out the window and explicitly said he wasn't going to be nice on the trail. He even called Harris, quote, garbage. The vice president, for her part, is also not backing down. Just today, she published a statement with the subject line saying, quote, statement on a 78-year-old criminal's Fox News appearance. And then that statement read, quote, after watching Fox News this morning, we only have one question. Is Donald Trump okay? Ouch. And that was in response to an interview that Donald Trump had on Fox News this morning. So that's a look at where the election is as of right now, where I think it is. Of course, it's a snapshot in time. But when I do come back, I'm going to sit down with gun violence prevention advocate Sheri Williams to talk about her work and recent headlines. So don't go anywhere right now. We'll be right back after this short break. In today's fast-paced and chaotic political landscape, it's more important than ever to stay informed and responsible as voters. That's why the Ishan S. Show is here, to help you make sense of it all. It's my mission to democratize news access, provide unbiased reporting, and deliver real analysis on the biggest issues of our time. And I love this job so much because it allows me to teach and inform so many people, specifically young people, about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. And so if you find my episodes valuable, please share them with your friends and family. It's the best way to help this show grow. Please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, and check out the political news blog and subscribe there on the ishanshow.com for more in-depth analysis. We're also active on X and Instagram, so be sure to follow us there as well for breaking news posts and updates about the show. Every time someone tells me that the Ishan S. Show is the reason they went out to vote or they paid attention to a news cycle, it means the world to me. Thank you for your incredible support over the past 3 years. Your engagement and dedication mean the world to me. And as we head into the final weeks of the 2024 election, I look forward to continuing this journey together. And now we're going to return back to the great episode that we have planned for you. You're about to listen to my discussion with gun violence prevention advocate Sheri Williams. If you want to listen to the full version of this interview, then you can go to the ishanshow.com to listen to my full conversation with her. But the great interview we have planned for you starts right now. So the epidemic of gun violence is something that has plagued this country for quite a while. And even here on the Ishan S. Show, we have covered tragedies, including the Uvalde shooting and the Buffalo shooting that happened in New York 2 years ago. We've also covered significant legislation passed, including the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So in order to get a better sense of where we're at right now in the fight against gun violence in this country, I'm very excited to have on our next guest who's been active in this movement since 2018. So, Sheri Williams, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishan S. Show.
Thank you, Ishan, for having me. I'm honored to be a guest on your show.
Well, thank you so much. We're happy to have you. Before we get into the interview, why don't you take a few moments to introduce yourself to my audience?
Okay, I'm Sheri Williams. I'm a mother of 2 boys who are 24 and 20, and I became active in the gun violence movement in 2018, as you mentioned, after Parkland. My oldest son is the same age as a lot of the kids that were in Parkland, and I just felt that rather than being a keyboard warrior on Facebook and social media, that wasn't moving the needle at all. And so I needed to get off the sidelines and do something about it. So it's now my mission to help gun violence because it's not just the mass shootings, it's what we do every day, and we're not safe anywhere. And we should be able to live our lives freely and safely and happily without fear for our lives. And that's in any community, because we know that no zip code is immune to this epidemic.
Could you tell us a bit more about the work you have been doing since then? What kind of work have you been doing? How might people have seen you before this interview?
So I joined a large gun violence prevention organization. And since then, it was just putting one foot in front of the other, going to a meeting, learning more how I could get involved. And then gradually I stepped up into leadership positions because it's propelled me to do more than just go to meetings, to be more active and use what I can in my privileged situation so that I can help move the needle forward. And so by doing that, I've learned more about organizations and how we can collaborate together because we can't do this alone. We need to be in the same space, to be on the same page. And I've learned with activism, it's tiring, it's exhausting, but it's what we all need to be doing, whether it's gun violence prevention or climate change or reproductive freedom, LGBTQ. We all need to be doing what we can so that we can all be safe and happy and be able to live our lives. So, in regard to your question, I had moved up into leadership so that I could learn more and do more. And I've learned so much in the process. And I feel like with my involvement in this movement, I can say that I'm doing all that I can so that I'm hoping it will allow people around me and people I don't know see that it just takes one person to get involved. And any small action is a big action because we all can do our share and it's not where it should be a burden. And, in the meantime, I've made and met some phenomenal people and they've become my community.
But I wanted to move over to some policy questions. So I think I did mention this at the top, but there was a significant gun control package passed 2 years ago, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Among other things, it extended background checks, increased or promoted red flag laws for states, and closed the boyfriend loophole. With the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, there have been some who've said that it's not gone far enough in terms of the historic aspect of it. It is the biggest gun control package in 30 years. I was curious to know what your thoughts were on this bill and whether or not it's done enough and if we need to expand on the work that's been done there.
First, I wanted to mention in terms of semantics that we typically say gun safety or gun violence prevention. Gun control seems so divisive. And so part of what I try to do is get people on the same page so that we can have conversations. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it is an issue that affects everybody, gun owners, non-gun owners, and to get on the same page with the language is really important. But in regards to your question, that there's always going to be more that needs to be done. So it's a start. And for being able to close the boyfriend loophole is huge because it ties into relationships who aren't married and it addresses gun violence, domestic violence, because we know how common that is. I mean, we have a whole month in October addressed to domestic violence awareness and the intersection of guns in domestic violence is deadly. And so to have that bill passed, the to have the Biden administration supporting that, he has done so much in this movement to take a stance on bump stocks and move the conversation so that we can normalize it and address the fact that it is something that should be a bipartisan issue, that it's not just a Democratic issue, it's not just liberals, because it affects everybody. I mean, we know that the recent assassination attempt on Donald Trump a week or so ago, that it's not just the Democrats or the liberals that need to get involved. So we need to be pushing this on all aspects. And so any legislation that moves the needle forward is a step in the right direction. And it allows us to open the door to expand and move more forward so that action can take place, whether it's in a legislative space or just to have more conversation about why this needs to be continuing.
Thank you for that. So, I guess in a more specific focus, because we're both from Illinois, the great state of Illinois, and here Governor Pritzker signed after the Highland Park shooting. Governor Pritzker signed an assault weapons ban, one of the first in the nation, one of the most expansive. It's faced some challenges in the courts for our listeners who don't know, but for the most part, it's turned out to be pretty successful in its implementation, although it still has a few caveats in place. But aside from that, just with the policy aspect of it, with a full assault weapons ban, is this a model that that the entire country should be following?
It is, because if we don't get this passed on a national level, then other states can see what's possible. And as you know, living in Illinois, there is the gun violence in Chicago is far too common. And nationally, we see these headlines in the news. And so, again, it's not just massacres, it's the everyday city gun violence. Will an assault weapons ban address that? No, but it's going to help minimize some of the school shootings, some of the domestic violence shootings within our state. And so, what we want to do is make that a domino effect to other states around us, because as Shannon Watts, who founded Moms Demand Action, said that we're only as safe as the weakest state, as a state with the weakest gun laws. And so we're surrounded by Indiana, Iowa, Wisconsin. And so we need to strengthen the laws there. So with the Protect Illinois Communities Act, which has the assault weapons ban, that's a start. And fortunately, the Supreme Court most recently did not address or want to bring up that lawsuit, because it was brought up in Springfield, or not Springfield, in Washington most recently. So they're not doing anything with the challenges to that law. And also with the Protect Illinois Communities Act, the assault weapons ban is part of it. The other parts are the serialization of handguns, and also to strengthen the borders within Illinois so that guns aren't trafficked over our Illinois borders. And so it is all encompassing in that it addresses different parts of gun violence and not just the assault weapons ban.
Perfect. And of course, this is the Ishana show, and we love to talk politics here. So I'd be remiss if we didn't have a few questions about that. So I'm sure you've heard by now, President Biden did drop out of the 2024 election, passing the reins to Vice President Kamala Harris. President Biden didn't talk as much about an assault weapons ban, but within her first speech, Vice President Harris did commit to trying to pass an assault weapons ban. I wanted to get your thoughts on this shift in the party, as well as that discussion about a nationwide assault weapons ban.
Well, I mean, President Biden started the conversation, and Vice President Harris is continuing the conversation. As I mentioned, this administration has done so much for gun violence prevention and creating the first White House gun violence prevention task force. And I think that with Vice President Harris, who will soon become president, Harris, that we have the opportunity of doing more in gun violence prevention and knowing that mass casualties are still happening. And so I think that she's going to build off that momentum of what President Biden has done with this conversation, including assault weapons, to show that nobody in our country, unless you're in the military, needs to be owning an assault weapons. This is only to kill the most amount of people in the quickest amount of time. So if you are looking to protect yourself and your families, an assault weapon is not what's necessary to do so. And they're going to show that that is going to be on the pipe on down the pipeline to be able to address this issue.
Sheri, we are almost out of time. So before I let you go, are there any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with my audience?
I think that if we see that this is an epidemic and that we are all affected, I think they're saying that the research is that 1 in 6 people have been affected, or you know of someone that has been directly affected by gun violence, whether were at the 4th of July shooting in Highland Park, or if you know someone who has passed away from gun suicide. I mean, that's another topic that we haven't touched upon, that it reaches everybody. And that there's something that we can all do, whether it's to ask about whether someone you know, when you're sending a child, your own kids, to have a play date and asking if they secure guns in your home. You know, it's not just about whether you own a gun, it's protecting ourselves, our loved ones, whether you're writing postcards, phone banking, whether you're standing in front of your school board and asking them to pass a safe storage resolution. We can all be in this conversation. And I think that we all should be in this conversation because it does affect every one of us in this country.
Thank you so much, Sheri Williams. Thank you for all of that. And thank you for joining us here. We hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you so much for having me.